Welcome everybody to the Captain Spot. I'm your host Justin Freeman, 6 foot 1 inches, 275 pounds of fantasy knowledge, and it's week 12 and a half-ish, somewhere in that range. Who knows if it's week 12 or week 13, honestly. We're talking Wednesday afternoon football. The game that we thought would never happen appears to be likely to happen now between the Baltimore Ravens and Pittsburgh Steelers. This game's been postponed a number of times already. It looks like we are set for a middle of the afternoon kickoff here between Ravens and Steelers. This game looks like it is Ravens underdogs on the road by 10 points there in Pittsburgh. 41.5 point total here. It's just a bloodbath, a massacre of an injury report, especially as we look at the COVID protocols. Honestly, can't believe the game itself is happening, but it is happening, and so we are going to take advantage of that here on these Showdown streets. So why don't we just hop right into it, guys, and talk a little bit about the injury report, the COVID situation. There is so much going on here this week. It's important for us to know, this is actually an informational slate. And I wish times like this, DraftKings wouldn't actually throw the injury statuses for everybody up there. Makes it so easy for everybody at home on their couch just building hand-built lineups. Whereas, we're going to have an information edge still regardless. We are going to know who's active and inactive because, as always, 90 minutes before lock, we are checking those reports. But important to know who is going to be involved in these COVID protocols, who's injured for the game, and adjusting our roster accordingly. We'll start first and foremost on the Baltimore side of the football. No Lamar Jackson in this game. He is out on the COVID protocol. He will not play. Willie Snead and Mark Andrews join him. So arguably his number 2 and quite possibly number 1 receiver if you think about what they've looked like here lately for Willie Snead. Willie Snead out, Mark Andrews out. So 2 of his top 3 pass catchers undeniably are out, as is the quarterback himself. So we are playing with skeleton crew there in Baltimore. We also will not be getting Patrick Ricard available in this game. He's the fullback. He's like a D-line fullback hybrid. Comes in, runs I formation in front of Gus Edwards, that type of guy. He will not be in this game. J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram are also on the COVID list as of right this second. They are likely to be activated tomorrow, and I record this here late Tuesday night, so I'm saying first thing Wednesday morning, they'll get activated. That means they could not actually fly on the team plane to Pittsburgh, Baltimore to Pittsburgh, not the longest drive in the world, but still, they will have to make their own way from Baltimore to Pittsburgh for this game. But I imagine they will be there suited up, ready to rock and roll. So that is a different situation than we thought just a few days ago, where we thought Gus Edwards and Justice Hill would be dominating as lead backs in this offense. It actually looks like this running back stable will be relatively unfazed, with the only real addition to the injury report being Patrick Ricard, the fullback. So it looks like, and I will emphasize, please stay on news and notes throughout the course of the day. Do not make any assumptions about what's going to happen. Don't set a lineup and forget about it. This is a day and this is a slate that you're going to want to make sure you are on top of your lineup all the way up until lock. So Dobbins and Ingram look like they will be a part of this week's game plan. That is obviously subject to change. Now, without Lamar Jackson there for the Ravens, we'll obviously be getting Robert Griffin III. Okay, and we've seen Robert Griffin come in, spot up duties here and there, and it hasn't been great with RG3. Matter of fact, it hasn't been terribly great this year, even with Lamar Jackson here in this Ravens offense. There's been a lot to be desired, a lot of points left on the field. Now it's RG3 without Willie Snead and without Mark Andrews in this offense, without their fullback to just rely on that running game behind a power runner like Ingram or Gus Edwards. That's not going to happen. So we're going to see Robert Griffin trying his best out there to run the Baltimore offense, and have very low faith in exactly what that's going to look like. We haven't seen very efficient passing from Lamar Jackson. I definitely don't think we're going to get it from Robert Griffin here on this weird week, this weird schedule. They've had a little bit of extra time, obviously, but half that time has not been spent there in the facility. In fact, They were adamant about playing this game on Wednesday so that they could at least get a physical practice in on Tuesday after having been banished from their facility for so long. So I think this is going to be a sloppy game from Baltimore. Now, we are obviously drawing a lot of questions about what exactly to expect. We haven't seen this type of situation unfold before, but here we are. At the tight end position for Baltimore, I know we're still on the Baltimore injury report at this point. Hang in there with me. At tight end, Mark Andrews obviously missing for COVID. They have nobody left at the on the active roster there at tight end for the Ravens. They obviously lost Nick Boyle 2 weeks ago to an injury for the rest of the season. They won't have him. Basically, they have a handful of practice squad guys available. They called up Luke Wilson from the practice squad last week. He played a complement of snaps. I think he will be out there primarily all the snaps here this week, called up from the practice squad. However, Luke Wilson, even the guy who we're thinking about here, thinking about using as possibly the star tight end, is questionable with an illness. So we don't even know that Luke Wilson is going to play. If he doesn't, there are two more practice squad guys, Sean Culkin, Eric Tomlinson. These are names we've seen just bounce around team to team in the league. Nobody on this team at the tight end position is a playmaker. But, Luke Wilson is the guy who's come in and is going to be the clear favorite for snaps and targets at the tight end position. I should also remind you there for the Ravens wide receiver core, Dez Bryant's back. Dez Bryant is in this offense, and he was utilized heavily last week. He should become a feature part of this offense. I think he is the likely person to be a starting wide receiver here this week opposite Marquise Brown in this offense. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh injury report, where the big news is James Conner. James Conner placed on the COVID list. He will join Jalen Samuels there on the sideline. Jalen Samuels out with a quad injury. Those are really the only two injuries of note or illnesses of note, however you want to say that, here this week for Pittsburgh. They'll have Ben Roethlisberger, and then behind Conner, they'll have Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland, sort of operating a committee there. And then at receiver is the traditional three-wide set, Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool there with a little bit of James Washington, a little bit of Ray McLeod. And then at tight end, Eric Ebron's ready to rock and roll, and will be joined by Vance McDonald. So, usually don't go quite that in-depth into injuries and the entire roster, but I do think that's important for us this week especially. So, now that we have an idea of who to expect, we're talking RG3 and no Mark Andrews, no Willie Snead here on the Baltimore side, going up against essentially a full-strength team there in Pittsburgh. And not only are they full strength, they are the best team in the league right this second. They are undefeated, 10-0 heading into this game, and they've got their sights set on a Super Bowl title. This is obviously a divisional matchup. This means a lot in terms of the standings. The Steelers can seal off a win here. They've got just a clear shot in front of them towards earning the number one overall seed in the AFC. So an important real-life football game. A lot here on the line, and I think that's why the NFL wanted to make sure it got played. But here we are. We will break down this slate nonetheless. Let's take a look at the pricing this week, where we are talking about. Let's start with Robert Griffin III, the starting quarterback here, $8,400 for RG3. And trying to figure out what to expect from him. I don't think it's going to be a ton, but I think what's important to figure out is this running back rotation for Baltimore. Okay, and I guess I should start by saying I think if we're going to be, and I am pessimistic on this Baltimore offense, we need to be thinking about really lopsided builds. DraftKings will make sure that you have at least one player from each team. FanDuel will as well. So you can go as many as 5 from one team and 1 from the other team on DraftKings, or 4 plus 1 on FanDuel. So make sure that you are considering that. That is a very good way to get unique. Most players do not feel comfortable with that unbalanced of a lineup, but in a game like this, we're talking a 10-point spread. It's really easy to see how that happens. RG3 cost you $8,400. There's a good possibility that he could be fool's gold and provide sort of false sense of security for you there at the quarterback position. What I think is more important to figure out there at the running back position, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards. So we've seen the team basically formulate a game plan for Gus Edwards as the feature back. And I should add Justice Hill into that mix. However, now that Dobbins and Ingram are available, what does that look like? Because we saw Dobbins take over as the lead back last week. Came in and got 63% of the team's snaps, got 45% of the team's rush attempts. That's accounting 39% for the quarterback. So dominated rush attempts, only 9% for Gus Edwards, 6% for Mark Ingram. So feature back duties there for J.K. Dobbins. Now, can we expect that this week for a rookie coming off an extremely strange week and unique situation? I don't think so. I think it's going to look a little bit more like it looked the week before, and basically every other week this season, which is a true committee, a true three-headed committee there between Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Mark Ingram. If you have a strong feeling there, play it. I could see being called more towards Dobbins there. He'll obviously be a bit more expensive. I think Ingram's probably the guy I'm least interested in there. I could see them, sticking with the Gus game plan and just, letting Dobbins be insurance for them. I could also see the three-headed monster attack, and that sort of ruins the value for everybody, especially in a game we don't think is going to be super high scoring or super efficient there on the Baltimore side. Looking at the wide receiver position for Baltimore, starts with Hollywood Brown. Priced at $5,800, that's a very reasonable price point for Hollywood Brown, the guy who's probably most likely to lead the team in targets in this game. However, it's probably $4,800 Dez Bryant that could be the most interesting player there. 54% of the snaps for Dez Bryant. That is a pretty impressive little run there, especially just basically coming from obscurity, not playing at all last week, and now 54% in week 11. So here in week 12 and a half. What will he do? Can he build on that workload? And he looked, efficient. Went out there and secured the balls that were thrown his way. Didn't do anything flashy, but if we're looking for a guy and pay off with a touchdown, like Dez Bryant's basically a tight end playing the wide receiver position. As we look around at our other options behind Brown and Bryant, now I do have them as the 1 and 2. I could be wrong there in terms of elevating Dez Bryant to that status, but I think that's the right way to look at it, especially after the number of snaps that he got last week. Basically only trailed Marquise Brown and Willie Snead in the offense. But behind that tier is Miles Boykin, $1,800, and Devin Duvernay, $3,200. Both those guys are playing very similar number of snaps over the last 4 weeks. You could argue Duvernay is pulling ahead of Miles Boykin at this point, and thus the price differential. I think Duvernay probably slightly favored, but both are explosive players. We've seen both make big plays. Duvernay ran a kickoff back for a touchdown earlier this year. We've seen leaping grabs from Miles Boykin, who is just like a spark freak, just absolutely out of this world athleticism. So could either of those guys pop in an RG3-led offense? It's probably not my favorite thing in the world. Crazier things have happened. Now, DraftKings, just like right before I hopped on here, just added Luke Wilson to the player pool at $2,400. So he will be your best case scenario there at tight end. $2,400 for Luke Wilson. He got 17% of the snaps last week when Mark Andrews was out there and fully healthy. He was the tight end too, especially now that Nick Boyle is gone. As we look at other options there, Eric Tomlinson is on the roster. He's in the player pool there, priced at $200 as well. I mean, we're dart throwing there. I'm speculating the guy might be on the field and he might not. And that's really all we can do is know what's likely to happen. I mean, if Luke Wilson is the only, available tight end and they call up Eric Tomlinson as well, then, I mean, you basically treat Eric Tomlinson like you would treat any other tight end too in a traditional offense. Where maybe he gets 2 or 3 targets. If one of them happens to be a touchdown, then great. But you're playing a really thin dice game at that point. Let's take a look around at the Pittsburgh offense, where obviously Ben Roethlisberger will cost you $11,400 this week, and he's just a priority item. You got to have Ben Roethlisberger in your lineup this week. I hate to say that because there's a 10% chance that it doesn't work out, but Ben Roethlisberger should essentially be about as high priced or as highly owned of a player in Showdown formats this week as any player we've seen so far, and that just says a lot for how disappointing I think this Baltimore side of the offense could be. So I think Ben Roethlisberger $11,400 priority item for us. Now, Benny Snell is priced up at $8,800, and there is uncertainty how that backfield rotation could go between Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland. We've seen Benny Snell handle a big role in the past. In week 2, he stepped in with 45% of the team's snaps, 63% of the team's rush attempts on a game where James Conner left a little bit early. So could we see essentially that, basically mound pound up the middle role there for Benny Snell? He's not going to be involved in the passing game a ton. That role would be more likely to fall to Anthony McFarland. So I think if there is a separation of duties there, it'd be Snell the more likely to score a rushing touchdown, and Anthony McFarland the most likely to accrue PPR points. So you got to figure out where you think the touchdown allocation goes in this offense. Playing against Baltimore, they're going to be pretty stingy at all places wherever possible, but they're also banged up on defense and also have some COVID concerns on the defensive side of the ball as well for Baltimore. So figuring out Snell versus McFarland is going to be important. There is a $6,000 price, $6,200 pricing differential between those two, so that should encourage you a little bit more to the McFarland side, all things being equal. Now, tight end Eric Ebron, $6,600, has been a very big portion of this offense in recent weeks. Has had at least 10% of the team's targets in all but one game so far this season. So really, extremely, incredibly predictable usage there for Eric Ebron. He's heavily utilized in the red zone. I think he's a fantastic play at that price, but is not going to have the upside that some of the wide receivers in this offense are going to have. That's Juju, 9,600, Deontay Johnson, 10,800, Chase Claypool, 10,400. So they're all right there within $1,200 of each other, and I don't have a lot to say about differentiating the three. I think we know sort of what to expect at this point. The most likely player to lead the team in targets is Deontay Johnson, just barely over Juju. And basically it goes Deontay, Juju, Claypool in terms of expected targets, but in terms of efficiency, Chase Claypool is just playing out of this world in terms of efficiency. Like he's putting up, sort of Tyreek Hill level of, yards per catch and touchdowns per catch. Just phenomenal play there by Claypool. So he can do a little bit more on a little bit less. And then Juju's sort of right in the middle of all those categories. Hasn't been as explosive this year as we've seen in years past. However, if he can eat up targets in the middle of the field, that can be a big boon to this offense, especially if the goal is just to play keep away and just keep the offense on the field, sustain long drives. Juju could be a big part of that game plan. As we look at sort of the defenses and kickers, I think could be a big part of this game. Ravens D, $3K this week. Steelers D, $7,800. I mean, it's a lot of money to pay for a defense at $7,800. I wouldn't try to get too cute and and just hammer that home. I get the upside there, playing against a backup quarterback in really strange situation. But that's a lot of money to pay, and they'll probably be a lot more highly owned than you think. And we want to stay away from ownership as much as possible. I think playing Justin Tucker at $3,800, if you're doing a 5+1 Steelers onslaught, which is basically 5 Steelers, 1 Raven, your 1 Raven being Justin Tucker, I think makes a lot of sense, because what happens if the team just gets the requisite yardage to just cross midfield several times throughout this game, and Tucker's the only one scoring points? He could be getting a lot of distance field goals, and we know Tucker can hit those with a lot of predictability. So overall, why don't we take a look at the captain spot distributions here this week, where Ben Roethlisberger's our favorite captain. Again, a quarterback captain popping up here as number 1 option. And, we talk about why this happens. Happens this way every time when we have a really strong 3 wide receiver set where there's not one person who is favored over the other 3 considerably. So, behind Roethlisberger is Juju, Claypool, and Deontay Johnson. And then after that's Robert Griffin III, obviously still a dual threat player, but not going to be getting nearly the rushing volume that we expect from Lamar Jackson. And then Hollywood Brown, and then a big teardrop down before we get to Dez Bryant. So overall, we like those pass catchers there in Pittsburgh. And, Pittsburgh's one of these teams that still has a very, very high pass rate, not only in neutral game scripts, but also in games where they are heavily favored and heavily in the lead. So, just because they are up by 2 touchdowns doesn't mean they're taking their foot off the gas and just tossing it to Benny Snell a ton of times. At least that hasn't been their MO so far this year. Looking at flex, Ben Roethlisberger, got to get in your lineup. Can't say that enough. He's just a slam dunk, and I hate to say this because I never really have such strong takes on players. It just feels destined to blow up in my face when I do. And this is a game all about probabilities. But it's really hard to imagine Ben Roethlisberger not being in there, especially in a low-scoring game. I think he'll be fine, as at least a flex in your player pool. Following Ben is Juju. So the model really likes Juju here this week against Baltimore. Robert Griffin after that. Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and then Anthony McFarland. So McFarland grades out better than Benny Snell. The floor is really low for a running back that doesn't get targets, and that's who Benny Snell is. Now, could he have a 3-touchdown game? Absolutely. It's entirely possible that Benny Snell has multiple rushing touchdowns in this game, but the more likely scenario is that he has 0 rushing touchdowns. And on top of that, probably not going to be extremely efficient against this Baltimore rush defense. So we think a lot of the production is going to come in the air for Pittsburgh. You'll see Chris Boswell ranks right on up there. We're thinking, just going to be a lot of points. The team's favored by 10 over Baltimore. So we want to fit as many guys over there as possible. So that'll pretty much do it for us here this week. You've got all the tools you need in the toolkit. Let's go rock and roll and talk about Ravens Steelers, and let's don't leave until we come home with a big prize. We've got a lot of big prizes up for grabs, and a little bit of overlay alert. I don't know if it'll hold, but obviously with the game being a mid-afternoon game, there is a chance that we're looking at some overlay on both these sites. People are not quite interested and used to logging in and putting their Showdown lineups in the middle of the afternoon, right in the middle of the workday. So possibly we get an edge on our opponents that way. We'll take it however we can get it. That'll do it here for us this week on the Week 12 and a half show. We'll see you Sunday for the Sunday night show. Thanks for tuning in. Follow me on Twitter at JustinFreeman18. We'll see you guys soon. Later.